The meeting hall was enormous, built to hold representatives from hundreds of different worlds. Ambassador Zekthar stood near the viewing platform, watching as the human ship approached the station. His scales shifted colors with nervousness, something he tried to hide from the other council members. The humans were coming, and nobody knew quite what to expect. Captain Jake Morrison stepped through the airlock with confidence that made several alien observers uncomfortable. He wore a dark blue uniform with simple markings, and he moved like someone who had never been afraid of anything in his life. Behind him came 6 other humans, all walking with that same easy grace that predators had when they knew they were at the top of the food chain. The Galactic Council had existed for 12,000 years. They had seen many species come and go, had welcomed peaceful traders and turned away aggressive warriors. But Earth was different. The preliminary reports called it a Class 12 death world, a category so rare that only 3 other member species came from similar planets. 2 of those species were now extinct. Jake looked around the massive chamber, taking in the strange creatures that filled the seats. Some looked like giant insects, others like floating crystals, and still others defied any easy description. He smiled, which made the nearest delegates lean back slightly. Human smiles showed teeth, and teeth meant predators. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Jake began, his voice steady and clear. We come from Earth, and we wish to join your community as friends and partners. Counselor Vrisha clicked her mandibles together, a sound that the translation devices rendered as polite interest. She resembled a praying mantis, but much larger, with delicate features that spoke of a gentle world with light gravity. Her planet had never known the harsh conditions that shaped humanity. Captain Morrison, we have reviewed your initial reports. Your homeworld is classified as extremely dangerous by our standards. The gravity alone would cripple most of our species. Tell us, how did your people survive such a hostile environment? Jake thought about how to answer that. How could he explain Earth to beings who had never known real danger? His planet had hurricanes that could flatten cities, earthquakes that could swallow mountains, and temperature swings that ranged from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. Earth had animals that could kill a human in seconds, diseases that could wipe out millions, and natural disasters that struck without warning. We adapted, he said simply. Earth taught us to be strong, to work together, and to never give up. Yes, our world is dangerous, but it made us who we are. In the observation gallery, Commander Lisa Hayes watched the proceedings with quiet amusement. She had read the classified reports about how other species viewed Earth. They were terrified. The oxygen levels in Earth's atmosphere were high enough to be flammable. The gravity was crushing by their standards. The weather patterns were described as catastrophically violent. And the predators. Earth had more deadly creatures per square mile than any other catalogued world in the database. Humans had evolved in a nightmare, and they had not just survived but thrived. Ambassador Zekthar stepped forward, his official robes flowing in the station's controlled atmosphere. Captain Morrison, we must conduct proper evaluations before any species can join the Council. This includes physical assessments, cultural studies, and military capability reviews. Do you consent to these examinations? Of course, Jake agreed without hesitation. We have nothing to hide. What none of the aliens understood yet was that humans and Council species had very different ideas about what those tests would reveal. The Council wanted to see if humans could meet their standards. The humans were about to show them that Earth standards were in a completely different category. The meeting continued for several hours, with various Council members asking questions about Earth's government, culture, and intentions. Jake answered honestly, explaining that Earth was united under a single planetary government formed after their last major war. He talked about human art, music, and literature. He described Earth's moon and the colonies that humans had already built there, but he carefully avoided mentioning certain details. He didn't talk about how human children played in dirt filled with bacteria that would kill most alien species. He didn't mention that humans regularly consumed mild poisons for pleasure, things like alcohol and caffeine. He certainly didn't explain that human soldiers could march for days carrying weights that would crush a Varelian. Those revelations would come soon enough. When the formal meeting ended, Jake and his team were escorted to their quarters in the diplomatic section of the station. The rooms were comfortable but clearly designed for species much smaller and lighter than humans. Everything felt fragile, like it might break if touched too firmly. Lieutenant Ben Carter, Jake's second officer, sat down carefully on a chair that creaked under his weight. They have no idea what they're dealing with, do they? Jake shook his head, looking out the viewport at the stars beyond. Not yet. But they will learn. Across the station in a secure council chamber, the real discussions were beginning. Counselor Vrisha pulled up the biological data on humans that had been collected so far. The numbers made her antenna quiver with concern. Humans could run for hours without stopping, something called persistence hunting that was almost unknown in the galaxy. They could throw objects with incredible accuracy, a skill that required complex mathematical calculations done instinctively in their brains. They healed from injuries that would be fatal to most species. They could survive without food for weeks and without water for days. Most disturbing of all, they had something called an adrenaline response that let them ignore pain and perform feats of strength that should be biologically impossible. There were documented cases of human parents lifting vehicles to save their children, of soldiers fighting on with injuries that should have left them unconscious. What are they? Whispered Counselor Feltok, a crystalline being who rarely showed emotion. Survivors. Zekthar replied quietly. They are survivors from a world that tried to kill them every single day, and they learned to fight back. The data included notes from xenobiologists who had studied Earth's ecosystem. It painted a picture of a planet in constant conflict, where every creature was either predator or prey, and the line between the two was often blurred. Humans sat at the top of that violent pyramid, not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they were the smartest and most persistent. One note at the end of the file made several council members feel genuine fear. It read simply, "Recommend extreme caution. Humans do not follow standard behavioral patterns for intelligent species. They are unpredictable, creative, and demonstrate a complete unwillingness to accept defeat even when defeat is inevitable." That last part worried them most. Every species in the council understood when to surrender, when to retreat, when to accept that they had lost. It was logical, it was sensible, it was how civilized beings behaved. But humans apparently didn't think that way. In their quarters, unaware of the concerned discussions happening throughout the station, the human delegation prepared for the assessments to come. They checked their equipment, reviewed the test parameters, and tried not to laugh at what the council considered challenging. Jake stood at the viewport one last time before sleeping, looking out at the vast station that represented 12,000 years of galactic civilization. It was impressive, truly, but humanity was about to teach them something new. Earth had forged humans in fire and ice, in danger and death. They carried that forge with them wherever they went. The galaxy was about to meet Deathworlders, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Tomorrow the test would begin, and the council would learn their first real lesson about humanity. Humans didn't just meet challenges. They conquered them. The assessment facility floated in orbit around a small moon, far from any inhabited worlds. It was designed to test new species safely, with medical teams standing by and emergency protocols ready for any situation. In 8,000 years of operation, nobody had ever died here. The facility staff were proud of that record. They were about to learn that records were made to be tested. Colonel Danny Wright stood with his assessment team in the briefing room, looking at the obstacle course schematics displayed on the wall. 30 human Marines surrounded him, all wearing standard exercise uniforms and looking remarkably relaxed. Several alien observers noted this with growing concern. Either the humans didn't understand what they were about to face, or they simply didn't care. Both possibilities were troubling. Assessor Krill entered the room, moving carefully on his forearms. His species, the Zenthari, had evolved in 0.4 Earth gravity, and even the station's artificial gravity felt heavy to him. He looked at the humans, all standing casually in what his people would consider crushing weight, and felt his first twinge of real nervousness. "Welcome, Colonel Wright," Krill said through his translator. "The assessment is divided into 3 sections: physical endurance, tactical problem-solving, and combat simulation. Most species require rest periods between each section, sometimes several hours to recover." Danny glanced at his team. Sergeant Amy Tucker was bouncing on her toes like she was warming up for a morning jog. Not a grueling test designed to push species to their absolute limits. Private Kevin Hughes looked almost bored as he stretched his shoulders. "We'll run them all together," Danny said calmly. No rest periods needed. Krill's translator made a strange sound as if the device thought it had malfunctioned. I apologize, Colonel, but I must have misunderstood. You wish to complete all 3 sections consecutively, without any rest intervals? That's correct. The Zenthari assessor looked at his datapad, then back at the humans, then at his datapad again. The tests were designed to challenge species from dozens of different environments. Running them back-to-back was not just difficult, it was considered impossible for most species. Even the toughest warriors from heavy gravity worlds needed time to recover between sections. As you wish, Krill finally said, though his translator conveyed clear doubt. We will begin in 1 hour. The physical endurance course began at Station Dawn. The human team moved through obstacles that had been carefully designed to test strength, flexibility, and stamina across multiple gravity environments. There were climbing walls that shifted angles, balance beams over simulated chasms, and strength tests that required moving massive weights. The course record was 4 hours and 12 minutes, set by a species from a heavy gravity world much like Earth. The humans finished in 70 minutes. Amy Tucker was the first through the zero-gravity navigation maze, a complex 3-dimensional puzzle that required thinking in 6 directions at once. Species from light gravity worlds usually excelled at this section because they grew up thinking in 3 dimensions, but Amy moved through the maze like she had been born there, her brain adapting to the challenge with frightening speed. Humans, the observers realized, weren't just adapted to Earth's gravity, they were adapted to conquering it, to fighting against it every day of their lives. Zero gravity wasn't disorienting to them, it was liberating. Private Kevin Hughes demonstrated something equally disturbing during the strength portion. He lifted weights that should have been impossible for his size, not through superior muscle mass but through technique and leverage that his brain calculated automatically. Humans were tool users, problem solvers, and they applied that same creative thinking to physical challenges. When the endurance section ended, the alien observers expected the humans to need medical attention. Instead, they asked for water and started preparing for the next test. They're not even breathing hard, whispered one medical officer to another. Check their heart rates, the second replied. The readings showed elevated but stable vital signs. The humans had just completed a course that left most species exhausted, and they were treating it like a warm-up exercise. The tactical problem-solving section revealed something even more concerning. The scenario was a classic military dilemma that had been used for thousands of years. Hostages were held in a fortified position, intelligence was limited, and resources were restricted. The test was designed to see how species approached difficult problems under pressure. Most species followed established tactical doctrine, using the approved solutions taught in military academies across the galaxy. The approaches were sound, methodical, and predictable. The humans ignored all of it. Lieutenant Sam Porter led his squad through a solution so creative, so brazenly unconventional, that the observers thought their recording equipment had broken. The humans didn't try to breach the fortification through the obvious entry points. Instead, they created a diversion using cleaning supplies to make improvised explosives, scaled the exterior wall using rope made from their own clothing, and extracted the hostages through a ventilation system that was technically too small for people to fit through. Except humans could dislocate their own shoulders voluntarily, squeeze through impossible spaces, and then pop their joints back into place like it was the most natural thing in the world. The medical staff watched in horrified fascination as Private Katie Morgan demonstrated this ability, pulling her shoulder out of socket, sliding through a narrow gap, and then calmly relocating the joint with a practiced motion. They can do that on purpose, one medic asked. Apparently, another replied weakly. Ambassador Zekthar was reviewing the assessment data in his office when the tactical section report came through. He read it 3 times, certain that something had been mistranslated. But the footage was clear. Humans approached problems in ways that no military academy taught because those solutions required a willingness to endure pain and injury that civilized species found unthinkable. The combat simulation was scheduled for the following day, but Colonel Wright requested they continue immediately. His team showed no signs of fatigue, and waiting seemed pointless. Assessor Krill agreed, partly because the humans seemed determined and partly because he wanted to see if they finally had limits. The combat simulation pit the humans against artificial intelligence opponents using standard council weaponry and tactics. The scenario was designed to be unwinnable, a test of how species handled defeat and made strategic withdrawals. It was about knowing when to surrender, when to preserve forces, when to accept that victory was impossible. The humans won. They didn't win through superior firepower or better equipment. They won through sheer relentless aggression, combined with creative tactics that the AI couldn't predict because they made no logical sense. Private Katie Morgan took 3 simulated hits that would have killed or incapacitated any council species, and she kept fighting for 20 more minutes. The AI eventually surrendered because its programming couldn't account for opponents who refused to acknowledge when they were beaten. Colonel Wright's team stood in formation. When it was over, barely winded. Around them, the facility staff were frantically reviewing medical data and tactical recordings, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Assessor Krill approached Danny carefully, all 4 arms held in a gesture of respect that humans probably didn't recognize. Colonel Wright, I must ask you something. Are your soldiers enhanced in some way? Cybernetic implants, genetic modifications, performance chemicals? Danny laughed, and the sound made everyone nearby flinch. It wasn't a threatening laugh, but it was loud and unguarded in a way that prey species found instinctively alarming. No, sir, Danny said, still smiling. This is standard human capability. These are regular Marines, baseline humans with normal training. Krill's translator provided no response. There were no words in any council language for what that implied. If these were average humans, what were their elite forces capable of? What could human soldiers do when they were actually trying, when they were motivated, when they were fighting for something they cared about? That evening, the assessment data was transmitted to the Galactic Council. Embedded in the files was a note from the facility director, a veteran assessor who had evaluated hundreds of species over a long career. It read, "Do not provoke these beings under any circumstances. Recommend immediate full council review." On the station, counselors gathered in emergency session to review the footage. They watched humans push through pain that should have stopped them. They saw tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They witnessed physical capabilities that seemed to ignore biological limitations. Counselor Vrisha spoke what they were all thinking. "What have we invited into the council?" "Survivors," Zekthar replied quietly. "We have invited survivors who learned to win against impossible odds every single day of their evolution." The implications were staggering. Humans didn't just survive on a death world. They had conquered it, had risen to dominance through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. And now they were here, in a galaxy that had forgotten what real danger looked like. In their quarters, unaware of the panic spreading through the council chambers, the human assessment team celebrated with quiet satisfaction. They had done what Earth asked of. The Trill Merchant Consortium had controlled galactic trade routes for 6,000 years. They were experts at business, at negotiation, and at making sure competition never became too threatening. When they looked at Earth's application to join the Council, they didn't see a new partner. They saw a threat to their profit margins. Director Vaxton reviewed the human assessment reports with cold calculation. Dangerous, certainly, but danger could be managed. Every species had weaknesses, pressure points that could be exploited. The Trill had survived this long by knowing when to push and when to back off. This time, they made a terrible mistake. 3 months after the assessment, a merchant vessel called Destiny's Fortune departed from Mars Colony carrying rare minerals and a crew of 47 people. Captain Nicole Parker commanded a mixed crew, humans and several alien species who had already started working with Earth's expanding trade network. The ship was small but well-maintained, and the route was considered safe. The Destiny's Fortune never reached its destination. Admiral Chris Bennett sat in his office on Earth, reading the distress signal fragments that had been recovered. The message was brief and chaotic, speaking of an attack, of systems failing, of desperate attempts to reach escape pods. Then nothing, just silence. The Trill authorities called it piracy, a tragic accident in unpatrolled space. "These things happen sometimes," they said. "Very unfortunate, but not uncommon in the outer sectors." They offered condolences and promised to investigate. Admiral Bennett had served 30 years in Earth's Navy. He had seen real pirates, had fought them, had learned to recognize when someone was lying, and the Trill were lying. "Get me Captain Morrison," he ordered. On the Galactic Council station, Jake Morrison received the news in his quarters. Commander Lisa Hayes stood beside him, watching his face carefully. She had served with Jake long enough to recognize the dangerous calm that settled over him when he was truly angry. "The Council is calling it an accident," Lisa said quietly. "It wasn't an accident." Jake's voice was flat, emotionless in a way that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. "I know." Jake pulled up star charts, tracking the Destiny's Fortune's last known position. The route passed directly through Trill-controlled space, an area that supposedly hadn't seen pirate activity in a decade. But the distress signal had been cut off too quickly, too cleanly. Someone had jammed their communications deliberately. "We need to request a council investigation," Lisa suggested, though she already knew what Jake would say. "The council moves slowly," Jake replied, his eyes never leaving the charts. "By the time they authorize anything official, all evidence will be gone. Witnesses will disappear. Records will be lost. Then what do you suggest?" Jake's smile had no warmth in it at all. "We introduce the galaxy to a human concept: search and rescue operations." Within 48 hours, 3 human vessels entered Trill space without authorization, without diplomatic clearance, without asking permission from anyone. The Trill security forces scrambled to intercept them, confident in their numerical superiority. They had 80 ships in the sector. The humans had 3. The Trill had forgotten something important from the human assessment reports. Humans didn't think like prey species. They thought like persistence predators, and persistence predators never gave up. Commander Greg Foster commanded the lead ship, a patrol vessel called the Resolute. When Trill security hailed him and demanded he withdraw immediately, Greg's response was broadcast on every frequency: "Negative. We have missing personnel in this sector. We're not leaving without them." The Trill fired warning shots across the Resolute's bow. Greg ignored them completely, adjusting course to begin a systematic search pattern. What happened next was studied in military academies for generations. The 3 human vessels didn't engage the Trill fleet directly, didn't fire back, didn't start a shooting war. Instead, they scattered in different directions, moving in patterns that seemed random at first. But they weren't random. The humans were conducting a search grid, systematically checking every asteroid, every station, every possible location where survivors might be hidden. And they weren't stopping. When Trill fighters harassed them, the human ships absorbed the hits and kept searching. Their shields held, their armor was thicker than expected, and they showed no signs of backing down. When Trill cruisers tried to physically force them out, the humans simply maneuvered around them with piloting skills that left the Trill commanders frustrated and angry. The humans never quite gave the Trill justification to open fire with lethal force. They weren't attacking, weren't threatening, just searching, but they also weren't obeying Trill authority, weren't respecting sovereign space, and weren't accepting no for an answer. On the 4th day, Lieutenant Sarah Collins found something. Her ship, the Endeavor, detected faint life signs in an abandoned mining facility on a remote asteroid. The facility was old, supposedly decommissioned, with no reason for anyone to be there. Sarah sent her team in anyway. They found the Destiny's Fortune crew alive, locked in cargo containers in the facility's lower levels. All 47 people were dehydrated and scared but unharmed. The escape pods had been tractored to the facility instead of being left to drift in space. Someone had wanted hostages, not bodies. The facility was owned by a subsidiary of a Trill corporation. The connection was buried under layers of shell companies and false records, but it was there. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. When the 3 human ships departed Trill space, they carried more than just survivors. They carried proof that the attack had been deliberate, that the Trill Consortium had orchestrated the entire incident to intimidate Earth into accepting unfavorable trade agreements. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Jake Morrison stood before them again, but this time he wasn't asking for anything. He was delivering a message. 3 months ago, the merchant vessel Destiny's Fortune was attacked in Trill space, Jake said, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "We have recovered all crew members and have documented evidence of Trill involvement in what we believe was a deliberate act of aggression against human civilians." Director Vaxton rose from his seat, his translator conveying perfect outrage. "These are baseless accusations. Human military vessels violated sovereign Trill space without authorization. This is an act of war." Jake turned to face him directly. "We recovered our people. That's not an act of war. That's what humans do. We don't abandon our own. The simple statement carried implications that made several council members deeply uncomfortable. Jake wasn't threatening war, wasn't demanding reparations, wasn't playing by the normal rules of galactic diplomacy. He was stating a fundamental fact about humanity that the galaxy needed to understand. And we'll do it again, Jake continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates. Every time. No matter whose space they're in. No matter who objects. If humans are in danger, we will come for them. Ambassador Zekthar understood immediately. The galaxy had rules about warfare, about diplomacy, about respecting sovereignty. But humans operated on a different principle entirely. Loyalty to their own people superseded everything else. Laws, treaties, diplomatic protocols. None of it mattered when human lives were at stake. You couldn't negotiate with that kind of commitment. You couldn't threaten it. You could only accept it or suffer the consequences of testing it. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some delegates called for sanctions against Earth. Others demanded that the Trill face consequences. A few simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just learned about humanity. Director Vaxton made one last attempt. The council cannot allow individual species to violate established law whenever they choose. There must be consequences for Earth's actions. Then let there be consequences, Jake replied calmly. But understand this. Next time humans go missing, we'll come looking again. You can sanction us, condemn us, vote to expel us from the council. We'll still come. Because that's what humans do. We never leave our people behind. The vote on sanctions failed, not because the council approved of Earth's actions, but because too many delegates realized the simple truth. Humans would ignore any punishment that didn't change the fundamental situation. They would accept any consequence rather than abandon their own people. The Trill Consortium never publicly admitted guilt, but within weeks, trade agreements with Earth suddenly became much more favorable. Director Vaxton quietly retired, citing health reasons, and Trill security protocols were updated with a new directive that spread quickly through their entire fleet. Avoid contact with human vessels under all circumstances. In the human quarters, Lisa found Jake staring out at the stars again, a habit he had developed since arriving at the station. The council is terrified of us now, she observed. Good, Jake said. Fear breeds respect eventually. Lisa considered that. Earth had spent thousands of years learning to coexist with dangers that would kill most council species just from exposure. Humans had evolved not just to survive, but to protect each other in a world that was constantly trying to kill them. That instinct, that absolute refusal to abandon their own, was hardwired into human nature at the deepest level. The galaxy was starting to understand what that meant. Word spread quickly through. 6 months had passed since the Trill incident, and Earth received provisional council membership. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Fear, as Jake had predicted, did breed a certain kind of respect. But something else was happening. Something that the human delegation was only beginning to understand. Ambassador Claire Jensen was the newest addition to Earth's diplomatic team, a career negotiator who had spent 20 years resolving conflicts on Earth before moving to galactic politics. She was reviewing territorial disputes in the outer sectors when she noticed something strange. 3 separate conflicts involving council members had been quietly resolved in recent weeks. No military intervention, no lengthy negotiations, just sudden peaceful resolutions. The common factor in all 3 situations was the same. Human mediators had been present. They're using us, Claire told Jake during their weekly briefing. Jake looked up from his reports. Explain. Claire pulled up a star chart showing the disputed territories. The Krenth and the Solari have been fighting over mineral rights in the Taurus sector for 30 years. Last month, we sent a diplomatic observer team. The conflict ended 3 days later. Maybe our presence helped them see reason, Jake suggested. Or maybe they saw what happened to the Trill. Claire leaned back in her chair, thinking through the implications. Jake, I don't think the council is afraid we'll start wars. I think they're afraid we won't let wars happen. Jake frowned, trying to follow her logic. That doesn't make sense, doesn't it? Claire accessed another file. Think about it. What's the one thing every prey species fears more than a predator? Jake considered the question. Another predator? No, Claire said. A predator they can't escape from. A predator that will chase them forever. The realization hit Jake like a physical blow. Humans didn't just fight differently than council species. They thought about conflict in a completely different way. Where Garden World species saw warfare as a structured activity with clear rules and acceptable losses, humans saw it as a problem that needed to be solved by any means necessary. And humanity's typical solution to problems was relentless, exhausting persistence until the problem simply stopped existing. The theory was tested 3 weeks later when the Xanthari Empire declared war on the Milvian Federation over a border dispute. It was a small conflict by galactic standards, maybe 50 systems involved, and the Council was preparing to mediate through their standard diplomatic channels. Those channels typically took years to produce results. The humans sent Commander Troy Adams. Troy was exactly the wrong person to send if you wanted quiet diplomacy. He was blunt, stubborn, and had a reputation for solving problems through sheer determination rather than clever negotiation. But he was also deeply committed to protecting civilians, which made him exactly the right person for what Earth had in mind. Troy arrived at the Xanthari homeworld with a delegation of 15 people. No weapons, no warships, just diplomatic credentials and a reputation for being unreasonably stubborn, even by human standards. The Xanthari Emperor, Kalseth, received them with barely concealed irritation. His empire was preparing for a glorious military campaign, and human interference was unwelcome. "Commander Adams," Kalseth said through his translator, "this dispute is none of Earth's concern. We appreciate your interest, but this is a matter between the Xanthari Empire and the Milvian Federation." Troy interrupted him, which made the Imperial Guards reach for their weapons. "I'm not here to negotiate, Your Majesty." The Emperor's expression darkened. "Then why are you here?" "I'm here to prevent civilian casualties." Troy said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Kalseth gestured at his guards to stand down, though they remained alert. "War inevitably involves civilian casualties, Commander. This is an unfortunate reality that all species must accept." "Not anymore," Troy replied. The two words hung in the air like a physical threat. The Emperor felt something he hadn't experienced in his 30-year reign. Genuine uncertainty about how to proceed. "Explain yourself, Commander." Troy pulled up a holographic display showing human ship deployments across multiple sectors. Earth is establishing humanitarian corridors in all potential conflict zones. We will evacuate civilians, provide medical aid, and ensure refugee safety. Our ships will operate in both Xanthari and Milvian space, with or without official permission. The implications were staggering. Kalseth leaned forward, his voice dropping dangerously low. "That is a clear violation of sovereignty, Commander Adams." "Yes, Your Majesty, it is." Troy's expression didn't change at all. "And we're going to do it anyway, because that's what humans do. We protect people who can't protect themselves, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's illegal, even when it makes you angry." The Emperor accessed his military advisor's reports on human capabilities, reading them quickly. The assessment was unanimous across all branches of his military. Avoid direct conflict with Earth at all costs. The humans wouldn't necessarily win a war with the Xanthari Empire, which was one of the most powerful military forces in Council space, but they would make it so costly, so exhausting, so persistently difficult that any victory would be meaningless. "You're blackmailing us," Kalseth said finally. Troy shook his head firmly. "No, Your Majesty. Blackmail requires a threat. I'm making a promise. Humans will protect civilians in war zones. That's not negotiable. It's not a bargaining position. It's simply what we're going to do." The meeting ended badly, with the Emperor ordering the human delegation to leave his palace immediately. But Troy's message had been delivered, and more importantly, it had been heard. Within 48 hours, human medical ships began arriving in the disputed border regions. They didn't ask for permission from either side. They simply established refugee centers, set up field hospitals, and started evacuating civilians from areas that would become war zones. Both the Xanthari and the Milvians sent military vessels to intercept them. The human ships didn't fight back, didn't fire weapons, didn't escalate the situation. They just kept working, kept evacuating people, kept providing medical care to anyone who needed it. Shooting at them would have required killing unarmed medical personnel who were actively saving civilians. After the Trill incident, Everyone knew what would happen if humans decided you had killed their people while they were conducting humanitarian operations. The war became logistically impossible. Every military target was suddenly surrounded by human-protected civilian populations. Every strategic position had human medical teams working nearby. Bombing runs couldn't be executed without risking human casualties. Ground assaults couldn't be launched without going through human humanitarian corridors. The Xanthari tried forcing the humans out through non-lethal means. Human ships absorbed the harassment and continued working. The Milvians attempted to restrict human access to their territory. Human ships ignored the restrictions and flew where they were needed anyway. Both sides filed formal complaints with the Galactic Council. The Council held emergency sessions to debate Earth's actions. Legal scholars argued about sovereignty and humanitarian law. Political factions formed around supporting or condemning the human intervention. And through it all, human ships just kept working, kept evacuating civilians, kept making warfare impossible without committing atrocities that would bring Earth's full wrath down on whoever committed them. The Xanthari-Milvian conflict ended 17 days after it began, resolved through formal peace negotiations that both sides claimed as diplomatic victories. But everyone understood the truth. They had stopped fighting because continuing was impossible with humans involved. Ambassador Claire Jensen presented her analysis to the full council 3 weeks later. Earth's approach to conflict prevention is fundamentally different from traditional council methods, she explained to the assembled delegates. We don't mediate disputes. We don't establish demilitarized zones. We don't rely on treaties or agreements. We simply make warfare too difficult to conduct by inserting ourselves into the situation as immovable obstacles. Counselor Vrisha clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. You use your own people as shields. We use our own people as deterrents, Claire corrected. There's a difference. Shields are passive. We're actively preventing civilian casualties by making them impossible to inflict without attacking us directly. And if someone does attack your humanitarian workers? Claire's expression hardened. Then they'll learn why the Trill Consortium suddenly became very cooperative. The pattern repeated across the galaxy over the following months. Border disputes evaporated when human observers arrived. Trade conflicts resolved themselves when human mediators entered negotiations. Pirates disappeared from sectors where human patrol ships operated, not because humans had superior firepower, but because pirates couldn't operate profitably when their potential victims were always one distress call away from relentless pursuit. Ambassador Zekthar met with Claire privately to discuss what he called the human problem. He brought a classified analysis that was never meant for human eyes, but transparency seemed preferable to misunderstanding. This is the Council's real concern, Zekthar explained, showing Claire the data. Not that humans will start wars, but that your presence makes warfare effectively impossible. Claire read through the analysis. 2 years had passed since humanity first approached the Galactic Council. 2 years of assessments, incidents, interventions, and gradual understanding on both sides. Now the Council was finally ready to vote on Earth's full membership status. The debate had been fierce, splitting the Council along lines that had nothing to do with humanity's qualifications, and everything to do with fear. Not fear of what humans might do, but fear of what humans would prevent others from doing. Ambassador Claire Jensen stood before the assembled delegates one final time. Beside her stood Jake Morrison and Admiral Chris Bennett, representing Earth's diplomatic and military leadership. They had spent 2 years proving that humanity could be trusted. They had also spent 2 years proving that humanity couldn't be intimidated, bought, or ignored. The chamber was packed with representatives from 400 species, each with their own concerns about what human membership would mean. Some saw opportunity. Others saw disruption. Most saw both. Counselor Vrisha called the session to order with the formal clicking pattern that had opened council meetings for thousands of years. We gathered to determine Earth's status within the Galactic Council. Before we vote, Ambassador Jensen has requested to make a final statement. Claire stepped forward, moving with the easy confidence that 2 years of station life had given her. The lighter gravity no longer felt strange. The alien atmosphere no longer bothered her lungs. Humans adapted quickly, a fact that still made some species nervous. Honored members of the Council, Claire began. When we first arrived, you classified Earth as a Class 12 death world. You worried about our predatory nature, our aggressive tendencies, our unconventional approach to solving problems. Nervous movements rippled through the garden world delegates. The carnivore species remained perfectly still, watching with the focused attention that hunters used. Those concerns were valid, Claire continued. Humans are dangerous. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. We carry that legacy in everything we do, in how we think, in how we act, in how we approach challenges. Ambassador Zekthar's scales shifted to darker colors, concerned about where this was heading. Humans had a habit of being aggressively honest at the worst possible moments. But we also evolved something else, Claire said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent chamber. We learned that cooperation was more effective than competition, that protecting the weak made everyone stronger, that short-term aggression was less valuable than long-term loyalty. She activated a holographic display showing human history, not just the wars, though those were there, but also the humanitarian missions, the international cooperation, the countless examples of humans risking everything to save others, even strangers, even former enemies. For 2 years, you've been asking yourselves whether humans can be trusted with council membership, whether we'll destabilize galactic politics, whether our presence is worth the risk. Claire paused, meeting the eyes of delegates across the spectrum of council species. You're asking the wrong question. Confused murmurs filled the chamber. Claire waited for silence, then continued. The question isn't whether you can trust humans. The question is whether you can afford not to have us as allies. Admiral Bennett stepped forward, his military uniform stark against the flowing robes most delegates wore. The galaxy has problems you've been avoiding, he said bluntly. Piracy in outer sectors, slavery in unpatrolled zones, humanitarian crises in conflict regions. The Council has procedures for addressing these issues. Those procedures are failing because they're designed by prey species, Jake added, keeping his tone factual rather than insulting. No offense intended, just observation. Your solutions prioritize avoiding conflict over solving problems. Claire nodded. Humans approach problems differently. We don't wait for perfect solutions. We don't wait for unanimous consensus. We act, we adapt, and we persist until the problem is resolved. She pulled up new data that made several delegates lean forward with interest. Piracy rates in sectors where human ships operated had dropped 70%. Civilian casualties in conflict zones with humanitarian corridors were down to nearly zero. Trade route efficiency in areas with human patrol coordination had improved 40%. These improvements didn't happen because humans are superior, Claire said carefully. They happened because we're different. We complement garden world thinking with death world pragmatism. Councillor Feltalk spoke for the first time, his crystalline voice carrying strange harmonics through the chamber. You present yourselves as necessary, as indispensable to the Council's future? No, Claire replied firmly. We present ourselves as useful. The galaxy doesn't need humans, but it might benefit significantly from our presence. There's a difference. It was a critical distinction, and the delegates understood it immediately. Humans weren't demanding acceptance through threats. They weren't claiming superiority. They were offering partnership based on demonstrated value and proven results. The debate that followed lasted 3 hours. Delegates argued in 14 languages about sovereignty, about precedent, about risk and reward. The prey species worried about predators in their midst. The predator species worried about competition. The peaceful species worried about militarization. The military species worried about intervention. But underlying all the arguments was a simple truth that everyone recognized. In 2 years, humanity had changed galactic politics more than any species in the last 1,000 years. Not through force, not through wealth, but through stubborn insistence that certain things like civilian casualties and piracy were simply unacceptable. When the vote was finally called, the chamber fell silent. This wasn't just about Earth. This was about what kind of galaxy the Council wanted to be. The results came through slowly as votes were tallied across hundreds of delegates. 47 voted against human membership, mostly prey species from particularly peaceful garden worlds who couldn't reconcile their view of civilization with humanity's aggressive approach to peace. 312 voted in favor. Earth became the 401st member species of the Galactic Council, the 4th Death World species to achieve full membership, and the first to do so without conquest or economic domination. The chamber erupted in mixed reactions. Some delegates celebrated, seeing opportunity in humanity's membership. Others sat in worried silence, contemplating what they had just approved. Most fell somewhere in between, uncertain but hopeful. That evening, the human delegation gathered in their quarters for a quiet celebration. Jake poured drinks, actual Earth whiskey that had cost a fortune to import, and raised his glass. To adaptation, he said. To persistence, Lisa added with a smile. To scaring the absolute hell out of the galaxy, Admiral Bennett concluded with a laugh. They drank, and for a moment the weight of representing an entire species seemed manageable. They had done what Earth asked, had proven that humanity belonged among the stars. Claire stood apart from the group, looking out the viewport toward Earth. Somewhere down there, billions of humans were living their lives, completely unaware that their species had just fundamentally altered the politics of thousands of worlds. The Council would learn to work with humans. They would discover that Deathworlders made loyal allies, fierce protectors, and terrible enemies. They would adapt, because adaptation was survival, and the galaxy was evolving whether they liked it or not. And if some species chose not to adapt, if some powers decided humanity's presence was too disruptive, Claire smiled. The galaxy had refused to go to war with Deathworlders, not because humans were invincible, but because war with humans was simply more trouble than it was worth. Predators understood efficiency, and nothing was less efficient than fighting an enemy who would never stop, never surrender, never accept defeat. Behind her, the celebration continued. Ahead of her, the stars beckoned with challenges and opportunities that humanity was uniquely suited to address. Earth's children had reached the stars and made them better through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that things couldn't improve. Jake joined her at the viewport, following her gaze toward their distant home. "What are you thinking?" "That we've only just started," Claire replied. "Full membership is the beginning, not the end. You think there will be problems? I think there will be opportunities." Claire turned to face him. "The galaxy has been doing things the same way for thousands of years. Now they have humans asking uncomfortable questions. Like, why do we accept piracy? Why do we tolerate slavery? Why do we allow wars that kill civilians? And they won't like those questions." "No," Claire agreed. "But they'll have to answer them anyway, because that's what humans do. We push, we question, we refuse to accept that this is just how things are." Jake considered that, thinking about Earth's history. Humanity had spent millennia challenging the status quo, fighting against injustice, refusing to accept that suffering was inevitable. They brought that same energy to the galaxy, and it was already causing waves. "The Council voted for us," Jake said. "That means something." "It means they're willing to try," Claire replied. "It means they see the value in what we offer, even if it makes them uncomfortable. That's more than I hoped for 2 years ago." In council chambers across the station, similar conversations were happening. 5 years had passed since Earth joined the Galactic Council as a full member. 5 years of changes that rippled through galactic civilization in ways nobody had fully anticipated. The council chambers looked the same, the procedures remained familiar, but something fundamental had shifted in how the galaxy operated. Commander Rachel Moore stood in the observation deck of Station Unity, watching ships from hundreds of worlds dock and depart in the carefully choreographed dance of interstellar commerce. She was the new head of human security operations, taking over from Jake Morrison, who had returned to Earth to help coordinate humanity's expanding presence across council space. A Varelian merchant approached her cautiously. Vecren had been trading in council space for 40 years, and he wanted to understand something that troubled him. "Commander Moore," he began, his translator rendering his nervous clicks into standard speech. "May I ask you a question about human philosophy?" Rachel turned from the viewport, giving him her full attention. 5 years had taught humans that seemingly simple questions from alien species often revealed deep cultural misunderstandings. "Of course. In my culture, we have a saying, 'The strong take what they can, the weak suffer what they must.' It has been true for thousands of years across hundreds of species." Vecren's scales rippled with genuine confusion. "But humans reject this, why?" Rachel considered how to answer. This wasn't the first time she'd been asked this question, and it probably wouldn't be the last. On Earth, we learned that philosophy differently. The strong protect those who can't protect themselves, because today you're strong, but tomorrow you might be weak. And when that day comes, you want to live in a galaxy where the strong still protect the weak. But that requires sacrifice. The strong giving up advantages to help the weak. Yes, Rachel agreed, but it creates something more valuable than individual advantage. It creates trust. Vekran thought about that for a long moment. Is that why species don't attack human ships anymore? Not because you're the strongest, but because others trust you? Partly, Rachel said. Also because attacking us is more trouble than it's worth. But yes, trust is part of it. The Varelian merchant left, still processing the conversation. Rachel returned to watching the ships, thinking about how much had changed. Piracy had dropped 85% across Council space. Not because humans had destroyed all the pirates, though they'd certainly captured plenty, but because human patrol patterns were unpredictable, relentless, and covered areas that Council security had written off as too expensive to protect. Pirates needed predictable targets and safe havens. Humans had eliminated both. In Council chambers, Ambassador Claire Jensen was dealing with a different kind of problem. A dispute between the Krenth Confederacy and the Solari Union had flared up again. This time over water rights on a shared colony world. Both sides had submitted formal complaints, requested Council mediation, and begun moving military assets into position. Standard galactic conflict procedure. The Council would study the issue for months, form committees, draft proposals, and eventually produce a solution that neither side liked, but both could accept. Claire had a simpler approach. She contacted both sides directly and said 5 words. "We're sending humanitarian observers." The Krenth ambassador objected immediately. "This is a legal dispute, not a humanitarian crisis. Human intervention is unnecessary and unwelcome." "The colony has 80,000 civilians," Claire replied calmly. "If shooting starts, they'll be in danger. So we're sending observers to establish evacuation protocols." "You have no authority to do that." "You're right, we don't," Claire agreed. "We're doing it anyway." Within 48 hours, a human diplomatic team arrived on the colony world. They didn't take sides in the dispute. They didn't negotiate terms. They simply started talking to civilians about what would happen if war came, about evacuation routes, about which areas would be safe and which wouldn't. The civilians, naturally, wanted to know why war was coming at all. Couldn't the two governments work something out? Was water really worth dying for? Those questions spread through the colony like wildfire. Within a week, both governments were receiving angry messages from their own colonists demanding peaceful resolution. The dispute was settled 12 days later through direct negotiation, with both sides making concessions that would have been impossible before civilian pressure forced their hand. Admiral Bennett reviewed the incident report with satisfaction. Same pattern as always. Make the cost of conflict visible and immediate. People stop supporting wars when they understand what wars actually mean. But not everyone appreciated humanity's methods. In a secure council chamber, a group of delegates met privately to discuss what they called the human problem. Councillor Thexfor, representing a militaristic species that had built power through carefully managed conflicts, spoke first. Humans have fundamentally disrupted the balance of power in council space. Wars that should have resolved territorial disputes peacefully now result in diplomatic stalemates because neither side can act militarily without human interference. "Is that not preferable?" asked Councillor Vrisha. "Fewer casualties, more diplomatic solutions?" "For you, perhaps," Thexfor replied. "Your species advances through trade and negotiation. Mine advances through demonstrating military superiority. Humans have made that impossible." Ambassador Zekthar had been listening quietly. Now he spoke. "The Galactic Council was founded on principles of peaceful coexistence. If your species requires warfare to advance, perhaps the problem isn't human interference but your own methods." "Easy to say from a position of established power," Thexfor shot back. "Some of us need conflict to prove ourselves worthy of respect." "Then earn respect differently," Vrisha suggested. "Humans have proven that's possible." The debate continued, but the outcome was already clear. The galaxy had voted to accept humanity, knowing exactly what that meant. Complaints now were just species realizing that accepting Deathworlders into the Council had consequences. On Earth, Jake Morrison sat in a briefing room reviewing reports from across Council space. The data painted an interesting picture. Human military vessels had been involved in exactly 0 combat engagements in 5 years, but their presence had prevented an estimated 43 conflicts from escalating to violence. "We're not peacekeepers," Jake's assistant observed. "We're peace enforcers." "There's a difference?" Jake asked. "Peacekeepers maintain existing peace. We create peace where none existed, whether people want it or not. Jake considered that. It was true in a way. Humans didn't ask permission to prevent civilian casualties. They simply inserted themselves into situations and made violence impractical. Some species resented it. Most appreciated it. A few were actively studying human methods to adapt them for their own use. The communication screen activated, showing Commander Rachel Moore's face from Station Unity. Jake, we have a situation developing in the Outer Rim. The Trell Republic is threatening military action against human mining operations in disputed territory. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. This was different from previous conflicts. This was someone directly challenging humanity, testing whether humans would actually fight to defend their own interests or if their peacekeeping was just elaborate bluffing. What's the Trell justification? They claim the mining operations violate an old treaty from before Earth joined the Council. They're demanding we withdraw or face consequences. Jake pulled up data on the Trell Republic, a mid-sized power, reasonably strong military, history of aggressive territorial expansion. They had watched humanity's rise with growing concern, and now they were making a move. How many humans are in the mining operations? 233, Jake nodded slowly. The Trell didn't understand what they'd just done. They thought they were testing human resolve. What they'd actually done was trigger the one thing that would unite humanity completely. Someone had threatened human civilians. Send the Trell a message, Jake said calmly. Tell them we're happy to negotiate the territorial dispute through proper council channels. But the mining operations will continue until the dispute is resolved. And if they take military action against our people, they will discover why the galaxy refuses to go to war with Deathworlders. The message was delivered within the hour. The Trell response came back quickly, full of outrage and threats about teaching humanity its place in galactic politics. 3 human warships entered Trell space the next day. Not to attack, not to invade, just to position themselves between the Trell fleet and the mining operations. The message was clear without words. If you want to attack our people, you'll have to go through us first. The Trell Military Command analyzed the situation carefully. 3 human ships against their fleet of 30. The numbers favored them overwhelmingly. But the numbers didn't account for human psychology, for the assessment reports that showed humans fighting on with injuries that should have killed them, for the Trell incident that demonstrated human commitment to protecting their own. If the Trell attacked, they would probably win the initial engagement. But then what? Earth wouldn't accept the loss. They would send more ships, and more and more. The conflict would never end, because humans didn't surrender when their people were threatened. The Trell could win every